Who cares who Cain's wife was?
The Bible's very clear. It teaches that all of us came from Adam and Eve, and therefore all of us can be saved through Jesus, our last Adam. So without a historical Adam, the gospel message doesn't have much of a foundation.
Who did their son Cain marry?
Well, logically, the only answer is that he must have married his sister. It's important for Christians to be aware of the answer, but also to be aware of how to deal with some scientific or moral objections that people might raise against it. So we should all be prepared.
If Cain married his sister, isn't that kind of weird? So a common question that comes up when we're talking about the historicity of Genesis, how it's a historical narrative, a common question is, if this really happened, who was Cain's wife? Dr. Sarfati, I know you're a Ph.D. scientist. You've written extensively on Genesis, including a full commentary on the first 11 chapters. Mm-hmm. And you've spent decades engaging critics, looking at different arguments, and spreading this message around the country to different churches. So when we're asking this question, the first thing that comes up is, why do we care who Mrs. Cain was?
Well, it's a question of biblical authority and the reliability of the plan in the Bible to create first two couples. See, Adam is very clearly called the first man. Paul says so, not one of a whole of humans evolving from ape-like creatures. There were no other people on earth when God created Adam. And then he names Eve, which is actually Chava in Hebrew, because it's related to the Hebrew Chaim, life. So she was the mother of all living, so hence the name Chava. So we've got a progenitor couple of two people. That means the next generation, there must have been brother-sister intermarriage. This is a logical deduction from the biblical account. Now, a lot of critics have thrown it at us. I mean, I don't get it asked so often, but maybe when I first started almost 30 years ago, that was a common question thrown at us. We had the film Contact, the Carl Sagan novel, which became a movie starring Jodie Foster, and supposedly she left the church because her pastor couldn't answer that question. So it does get thrown up. So we need to know how to answer it, both scientifically and morally.
Got it. So the question then can be answered by a logical deduction from the text. And I know that there's been many different people who have tried to answer this question. Mm-hmm. One of the ways, for example, being that there were maybe other people outside of the Garden of Eden. Therefore, Genesis isn't actually describing the creation of the human race.
But that goes against what the New Testament and the Old Testament say, because as I said, Paul called Adam the first man, 1 Corinthians 15:45. Then also when he's preaching to the Greeks in Acts, he said that all of us were made from one man. Okay, so it's a very clear statement that Adam is the ancestor of everyone else on earth who ever lived. I mean, Luke's gospel traces Jesus via Mary, via David, via Abraham, via Noah to Adam, who is called the son of God, not the son of an ape. Okay, so and it's because of that we all come from Adam that we can be saved through Jesus, our kinsman redeemer, who is related by blood to those whom he redeems, which means he also came from Adam like everyone else did. So without a historical Adam, in fact, the gospel message doesn't have much of a foundation.
So the New Testament writers and everybody in the Old Testament all clearly understand that Adam and Eve are the first people. Mm-hmm. In many ways, it's the basis of all of the problems that we have in the world today and the gospel itself. So that does still leave us asking the question, how could all of humanity have come from these two people?
Well, we see the answer in Genesis 5:4, which says that after Adam had Seth when he was 100 years old, but he also had other sons and daughters. We have the name one. First one was Cain. The second one name was Abel, probably the second born too. Cain was definitely the firstborn. And then you have Seth born 130 years after Adam, okay? But there are other sons and daughters. So from those daughters is where Cain must have picked his wife. There must have been, it's a logical deduction, there must have been brother-sister intermarriage. Even if Cain married a niece, that niece must have come from brother-sister intermarriage. You can't escape it.
Okay, and is this a position that is kind of new, or does this go back at all?
Well, other people besides us have read the Bible. They understand logic. They've made the same deduction as I just did. Like Theodoret, Bishop of Cyrus back in the 5th century, he was asked, where did Cain get his wife? And he said, from his sister, of course. And then you have Martin Luther going into a great deal, the father of the Reformation, into detail about how Cain must have married his sister. Then even later, 19th century, these are the great Old Testament commentators, Kyle and Delitzsch, also said that at the beginning there must have been brother-sister marriage. So what I'm saying is nothing new. It's only because of later ideas they want to compromise with the millions of years, or they have an emotional yuck factor about it. So they have these unbiblical ideas of other people around this time of Adam. But that is just not acceptable. It's not what the Bible says.
Okay, well, let's address the yuck factor, for as you just called it.
Yeah.
There's some objections there, both scientific and then there's also moral objections, and both of those do carry some weight here. So let's start with the scientific issues.
Right, because the moral objection relates to the scientific objection, actually. So the science is the one we need to do first. And the issue comes from, why is it a problem today? And that is a bit of elementary genetics I have to explain. And that goes into why God designed sexual reproduction for a lot of creatures. And that's because we are in a cursed world now. God cursed the ground and everything else because Adam sinned. But one of the aspects of that is that we have mutations that are copying mistakes in our genes. Okay, now if we have, not just with humans, but with animals, if you want to spend a fortune in vet bills, get yourself a purebred because they're inbred. If you want to save yourself a fortune, get a mongrel or a bits of everything we say in Australia, okay? That will be much better. The reason is, see, we have 2 copies of each gene, one from our father, one from our mother. Okay, the thing is, we have a mutation in one place, we hopefully have the backup copy from the other parents. And if the parents are different, okay, they've both got mutations, but the mutations are in a different place. Each place where one parent passes on the mutation, the other passes on the backup copy. So the mutation is either blocked completely or it's mitigated somewhat. Okay, so the child or the doggy or whatever you have is somewhat protected. Okay, the problem is if you marry someone close to you, or like purebreds are pretty closely related, they'll have mutations in the same place. So it means at any one location, they've both got a mutation and both got a backup copy. There's a 1 in 4 chance that the mutation will be passed on to the offspring. And considering we have so many mutations, there's a good chance that some mutation from somewhere, the poor child or poor puppy will get both copies of the mutated gene and therefore will actually be a mutant. Okay, so that's the problem with close intermarriage today.
Yeah. So basically, if I'm understanding you right, if you have close intermarriage between people who are closely related, and I think of some of the royal dynasties of Europe, like the Habsburgs.
Go further back to Egypt too, yeah?
Yeah, you have an increased likelihood of that mutation being expressed and that person or animal's quality of life being significantly lowered.
This is a phenomenon called inbreeding depression, okay? But what you need for inbreeding depression is mutations.
Got it. Well, so that, of course, we have to ask the question, why wasn't this a problem for Adam and Eve's children?
Again, it goes back to the creation and the goodness of God. Now, God said 7 times in Genesis 1 that the world was good. And the 7th time he said it was very good. So those 7 goods culminating in very good. He's telling us there's nothing wrong in his finished creation. Now, a mutation is defined as a copying mistake. So saying that Adam and Eve had mutations, say that God made mistakes when he created them, I don't believe that. It's not, doesn't gel with his goodness. So God would have created Adam and Eve without any deleterious or harmful mutations. And now 1 generation on, there'll be hardly any harmful mutations in Cain and his sister wife either. So therefore, without mutations, inbreeding depression is a non-issue.
Okay, so it wouldn't have been an issue for Adam and Eve, but later on, there is a similar problem also in Genesis. Following the flood, of course, the earth and all living things that weren't on the ark are destroyed, and humanity has to restart from a population of 8 people.
Yes.
Would inbreeding depression have been a problem for them?
Well, it might have been, but remember, even Noah lived 950 years, okay? So all the lifespans before the flood were enormous, which I think means that mutational load was not too big. That's why they could live so long. Now, the problem is Noah is a very old father. He's 500 years old when he had his first, which was Japheth, and so a bit older when he had Shem, 502 or 3, older still when he had Canaan. So the problem is when fathers are older, their own reproductive cells accumulate more mutations and they get passed on to the child, which I think is the main reason why Shem's lifespan was only 600. So a big drop from Noah's 950. That's the main reason for Shem's lifespan drop, I think. Another thing to understand is that people who study population genetics realize there can be a problem. So they talk about population bottleneck. Okay, bottle wide here, then it necks out the narrow. So you say population's big here, becomes small.
Right, yeah.
Now, if the bottleneck is prolonged, then inbreeding depression is a huge problem. That's why, the conservationists are worried about species number getting too low because of the inbreeding depression problem. Now, the problem is the dominant model for human evolution is called the out of Africa model, and that postulates a very long bottleneck that humanity went through. But now we know from various people like the evolutionist Kondrashov, and you have John Sanford on the creationist side, have shown that mutation rate is much bigger than they hoped, and therefore such a population bottleneck would have made us extinct.
Yeah.
Now, when the population recovers really quickly from a bottleneck, like it definitely did at the flood, inbreeding depression is a much lower problem. And in fact, not much genetic diversity is lost if the population recovers really quickly from that bottleneck. And that's what you would have had at the flood, a very rapid recovery from the bottleneck. And Dr. Carter has done a lot of work on the post-flood human population. Right.
And so as the population gets bigger, it actually encourages more genetic diversity. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it means there's if you've got a small population, there's a big chance that you'll have a lot of the offspring will have that problem with the two mutations coming together. But if the population expands, then you'll get enough of the population without too many of those things happening. So, and the unfortunate ones where it does happen, well, they will often lose out in the struggle. But the population as a whole will survive and thrive if it can recover quickly enough from the population bottleneck. This is well known.
Okay, yeah. Well, and before we started filming, you talked about a couple of case studies in population bottlenecks that they were followed up by rapid population growth.
Yeah, I think these studies actually shed some light onto why it wouldn't have been a problem, this inbreeding depression for Cain and his wife. In fact, I'm not from this country originally. I'm a citizen of America now, but I collect citizenships and passports like you collect stamps, okay? I've got New Zealand and Australia and America. So back to my other two countries, Australia, we have a well-known rabbit plague problem.
Yeah.
We've got about 200 million rabbits. They do a whole lot of damage to the ground and to the crops and things. They're a pest, okay? But it turns out from fairly recent discoveries that they came from a population of about 24 rabbits that were dropped as a Christmas present. Well, thanks very much. Christmas present, December 1859. That's the year Darwin published his dreadful Origin of Species book, okay? And from that tiny population of 24, that's where we get this all too thriving population of rabbits in Australia. And the reason is they came at the right time because other rabbits didn't do so well but by the time they came, this population came in, the Australians had cleared away a lot of the brush and also shot quite a few of the predators. So the rabbits had no natural enemies and could just go across the continents, and fill it. Okay, so this is proof. Even though the rabbits, of course, would have far more mutations, it's closer to our time, you see. So far more, thousands more years to accumulate mutations, and yet they thrived from a small population because it could explode quickly. And back near New Zealand, the Chatham Islands are near New Zealand, and there was the black robin population had got down to just 2 individuals. Just 2, like Adam and Eve were, but of course far more mutated. But they careful nurturing, they actually rebuilt the Chatham Island, Black Island population from a single breeding pair.
Yeah.
And the point is called a fortiori, or how much more type argument. If they can do it for mutated black robins and mutated rabbits, right now, how much more could the population thrive from a pair that had hardly any mutations?
Right, and that helps to answer another common objection. It's not one that we're getting into as much here, but the question of how could we see such diversity of animals and species if Noah only brought a relatively small selection on the ark?
Well, he says God is the one. God told them the animals will come to you, is what he says, Genesis 6:20, which implies that God is taking care of the selection and the migration of the animals from the ark. People say, well, how did Noah get the animals from Australia and the poles and all that? Well, he didn't have to. They came to him, aside from the fact that there's one pre-flood continent anyway, so it wasn't Australia before the flood. But the thing is, selecting animals with low genetic load, no mutational, very low mutational load, and lots of genetic variety means that lots of varieties could come from that original pair. And it also turns out the ark is ideal for rapid production of varieties.
Okay.
Because there's the prevailing theory is called allopatric speciation, which means you have small and reproductively isolated populations. That's the best way you get varieties quickly and even new species, which creationists believe in and have done before Darwin's time. Like if you want to get a purebred, what do? You try to stop the purebred from breeding with other things, don't you? You protect it in case it's contaminated by something outside. You try and isolate it. But the mountainous regions of Ararat would provide a natural isolation barrier. So you can imagine these populations exploding from the initial ark animals and then spreading and becoming reproductively isolated because of the mountainous regions. That would produce varieties really quickly. So the ark landed in an ideal place for rapid production of variations.
Right. So what we see then is we have clear evidence that we've been able to observe and record that species can come from relatively small numbers of organisms, even a single breeding pair, and that the ark really does represent an ideal situation for that to naturally come about without human interference.
Exactly, yeah.
If you're enjoying this interview so far, you might be interested to know that we also produce the world's most widely read magazine on the creation evolution controversy, Creation Magazine. It's packed with beautifully illustrated articles showing how real science supports the Bible. It's designed for the whole family and is a great tool to strengthen your faith. Sign up now to receive 4 issues a year. Link in the description. So let's keep moving forward through biblical history. Yep. Was inbreeding depression a problem around Babel?
Well, it's interesting, Babel or Babel, as it should be pronounced in most of the world. Okay. Okay, so we have this division at Babel. They were trying to build a stupid tower to reach the heavens, and God sort of mocks them by saying, well, I have to come down to see what's going on there. It's a tiny, puny thing. So it's actually a mockery, the whole thing. But since they disobeyed his command to fill the earth, he forced them to fill the earth by confusing their languages. And in Genesis 10, you see the result of it. 70 nations produced, and of course the Hebrew nation was the 70th. I think the Hebrew nation was the 70th, okay, because God decided he's only going to work with that one nation. Okay, so you have this happening in the days of Peleg, because in the days of Peleg, the earth was divided. Now, chop out the chapter and verse numbers, and a few verses down, you'll see the earth that was divided was the earth that had one language and one speech.
Okay. So it's talking about people.
It's talking about people, yeah. But because people put chapter numbers, and you might miss that connection there, even though it's very close to it. Okay. But then you look also, Peleg had about half the lifespan of his father Eber. So that division seemed to cause a big lifespan drop. So that may have been small populations, and maybe inbreeding depression did have a part to play in that sharp drop of lifespan. So yeah, that was an issue.
Okay. Well, and then moving forward after Babel, but we're still in Genesis very early on. Abraham, he married his half-sister. So did that cause any issues, and we're about to get into like the moral questions here as well.
Because that was a covenant marriage. I mean, God clearly blessed that marriage. He blessed the child from that marriage. I mean, he made it very clear that his covenant will be fulfilled in Isaac, not in Ishmael, the child of the slave girl, or in the children of Keturah. It was only that marriage that God really made the covenant marriage, and that was a half-brother, half-sister marriage. So clearly it wasn't immoral at the time. It may not have been too much inbreeding depression at the time, because it's still fairly close to creation, about 2,000 years from creation. They're still living to well past our lifespan. Okay, so God blessed that marriage, from which the Jewish people came from, okay, and which means the Messiah came from there.
Yeah.
And the Jewish people are the ones who wrote the books of the Bible, the oracles of God. Mm-hmm. And even today, the Jewish people, 0.2% of the population, about a third of the Nobel Prize, a third of the world chess champions, okay, from 0.2% of the population. I think they're not a cursed race somehow. Anti-Semites, it's just out of luck there. Not going to happen. But it may have been some problems health-wise. I mean, we don't know, but Isaac, last 50 or so of his years of his life, he was blind, okay? I think something happened to Jacob's eyesight later on, too. Esau was quite as hairy for whatever reason, some sort of mutation there. So there may have been some health issues there, but maybe not serious enough yet to be a real problem, because Isaac still lived to 180. But it's possible there may have been problems there, but it wasn't yet a moral issue.
Okay, well, and that brings us to the time of Moses and the Mosaic Law, which very clearly indicates that you can't have close intermarriage between relatives. Right.
And the issue there, so that's now 1450 BC, so you're talking about 2,500 years after creation. So in those 2,500 years, you're going to have a lot of harmful mutations accumulating. And so probably by the time of Moses, God said, there's too much. We're going to now put a law that stops close intermarriage. Okay. Now, Moses was the one who edited the book of Genesis. He knew very well that Cain married his sister, and that Abraham married a half-sister. But by the time he wrote down God's law, he realized that God had said no more brother-sister intermarriage. So that's where the moral thing came in. But the moral thing is related to the scientific issue. Now you've got enough mutations for inbreeding depression to be an issue. But we know, just like the U.S. Constitution rightly said, you can't make ex post facto law.
Okay.
Ex post facto means you can't criminalize, you can't punish a person for doing something that wasn't against the law at the time it was committed. You can't make a law and have it work retroactively to punish someone when the law wasn't in place at the start. So God made the law in Moses' time. It doesn't work retroactively to punish Abraham and Sarah, or Cain and his wife, or the other people who must have been married. Seth must have married a sister to produce the line that came from him as well. Okay, so it wasn't immoral until God said it was.
Okay, and that puts us in an interesting position, because we believe that God is unchanging. His moral standard, because it's a part of his character, is also unchanging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So at first glance, doesn't it look an awful lot like God is changing his mind when he gives the law to Moses?
Well, yeah, God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Yeah, I agree with that. But the thing is, the outworkings of his standards may need to change. See, the Bible is progressive revelation. It's the revelation of his messianic plan as he works it out throughout history, the creation, the fall, and the eventual redemption by the Messiah. And in this progressive revelation, sometimes the laws that are appropriate for that period are going to change. I mean, like for instance, Adam was given green plants for food. That's very clear. And so were the animals. Now, when God cursed the ground, it's likely that some of the plants were no longer as nutritious. I mean, broccoli is proof of the curse.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so animals were already starting to eat meat. Between the fall and the flood, animals were already meat. Some animals were already meat eaters. But it wasn't until the flood that God said to Noah that I gave you green plants, now I'm giving you animals. So there's a change in the diet, but because of the change of the plants, it needed a change of the diets to keep us healthy. Then you get to the law of Moses, and so God is not working with humanity, he's working with one branch of it, the Jewish people, the people of Israel, and he says, makes a lot of laws to keep them separate from the surrounding nations. So a lot of the laws of Moses are symbolic of the separation from the pagans, so they could keep the Messianic line morally pure. And that's why sometimes there are things that you weren't supposed to eat. So you change the law there, like lobsters. They break a boundary. They break the boundary between sea and land because they have legs, but they're in the sea. So it's a ritual boundary breaking. So, and God didn't want Israel to break the boundary of don't do the pagan stuff. Okay, but then after the law of Christ, when Jesus came, the wall of separation is gone. That's what Ephesians says. The temple veil was torn from the top. You see, supernaturally from the top, not from the bottom. Okay, and then God had to tell Peter that you can now eat any animal because there's no longer any need to separate because the Messiah is for both Jews and Gentiles. So again, because of that programming, the progressive revelation, now the food laws have changed again. Another thing is sacrifices, because before, right from Adam and Eve, when he made coats of skin for Adam and Eve, God required blood sacrifice for sin. That's why Cain was rejected, Abel was accepted, because he brought a blood offering, okay? And so the blood could never take away sin, it could only cover sin until the Messiah came. But the Messiah has come, his death has not finally taken away sin, and therefore it would be immoral to sacrifice animals of sin before it was moral, and in fact required to do so. So it's a case, as God has worked out his plan through history, sometimes the laws are changed, even though his standard has not.
Okay, so that's progressive revelation as a doctrine and how we see it unfold in the pages of Scripture. So how does that relate to the issue that we're kind of discussing today, which is like close intermarriage?
Well, just as there were issues with the plants no longer being nutritious enough to be a really complete diet, here's a case where you have this new danger creeping into the human population, the increased number of mutations. So the increased mutational load meant that God eventually stepped in to protect us. Now, his standard's always been what's good for us. He loves us. He makes rules for our good. But with the new mutational load danger, he made another rule to protect us. He's always wanted to protect us. But now, with a new danger, he wants to protect us from this new danger. And one analogy, which I think my old boss, Dr. Carl Whelan, thought of, think of a farmer with his sheep. Sorry, we like sheep, you see.
Yeah.
Americans hate sheep, I know. But imagine that he lets the sheep go up to the natural boundaries of the river or the cliff face or whatever. Now a pride of wolves comes in, and now there's a new danger, so he now brings the sheep back and puts a fence around. So the sheep are now in a smaller area than they were before. But the shepherd's standard has not changed.
No.
He wants to protect the sheep, but because of a new danger, he's actually put a new fence in to protect them. And that's what the laws against brother-sister intermarriage do. They protect us they're a new fence to protect us from a new danger.
Okay, so to recap what we've talked about, what we see is that if we look at the immediate post-fall world, there's very few mutations present in the human population, so it's not dangerous for close relatives to intermarry. Then, as that starts to increase, we do actually see maybe in the text of Scripture that there are effects from those mutations, and it gets to the point that when the law is given to Moses, among those are a bunch of prohibitions against marrying close relatives, and it's very extensive what's forbidden.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what's the big takeaway that you would like people to consider when walking away from this interview?
Well, the fact that we can trust the biblical time, we can trust God created everything very good, that our ancestors go up to just two people. They're the progenitors of the whole human race. We can trust this biblical history, which the Apostle Paul made very foundational to his gospel message in 1 Corinthians 15. And the point is, when you look at modern science, that actually provides insights into explaining the biblical history, which we could trust the Bible before then, but these modern scientific insights about mutational load and having backup copies really brings to light why there was no prohibition in Cain's time or even in Abraham and Sarah, and why the prohibition came relatively late in human history. So the science is a case where the science backs up what the Bible quite clearly teaches, but it sheds more light on possible reasons why God made the rules when he made them.
Okay, well, thank you. I know you've written about this and about many other subjects very extensively in your commentary on Genesis chapters 1 through 11, the Genesis account. Tell us about what's in that book.
Okay, it's an 800-page commentary on Genesis 1 to 11. It actually goes up to 12. 3, I wanted to get the Abrahamic covenant in.
Okay.
I do talk about the Genesis 12 to 50 characters. Mine is only about a third the size of a typical congressional omnibus bill, so it shouldn't be too much to read. Now, of course, it goes through the text of Genesis, hopefully in simple language, but I do bring out some of the Hebrew language points in it, but not too technical. It's the only commentary that talks about dinosaurs and design and creation, the natural selection, the geology of the flood and the ice age. So it talks about some scientific things and even things like overpopulation myths and moral things. But also talks about how all the doctrines of Christianity have their beginnings in the early chapters of Genesis, they're foundational. And also I discuss how does the rest of Scripture treat Genesis? Because I mean, especially if we're Christians, shouldn't we have the same view of Genesis as Jesus did?
Yeah.
So I want to show where Jesus affirmed Genesis as real historical narrative and not myth or allegory.
I'll have a link to where you can purchase that in the description. Dr. Sarfati, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me.